Better Call Saul is, in my opinion, one of the greatest shows in television history. I have certainly discussed it at length, but truly never get tired of doing so. I'll drop links in the description below to my past BCS-centric videos. In a few of them, I talk about my favorite episodes of the series, which really only constitutes maybe 30% of the show's overall episodic content. So today I'm going to be discussing every single solitary episode of this impeccable series, while ranking them from my least favorite to favorite. Though I must mention that when it comes to this show, Saul's Parent series, or a favorite series of films of mine like the Harry Potter movies, my least favorite chapter is still a really enjoyable piece. Number 63. This episode is expectedly solid. It's just less so eventful than the others. It's more of a transitional episode. We get more insight into Mike's soft side and the lengths he will go to in the name of his family's comfort as he stakes out on his daughter-in-law's street for hours on end to personally assure her safety. We get an always welcomed appearance from the vet, Dr. Caldera, and an intriguing ending that teases a potential future partnership between Mike and Nacho. 62. Jimmy's Fifi-centric ruse at the airbase is as hilarious as it is disrespectful. While it's unfortunate for Kim, but quite cool to see Chuck really display his lawyer prowess as he tries and succeeds in nabbing Mesa Verde from Miss Wexler. 61. Rico introduces a great supporting character in Rich Schweikert during one of the series' most humorous moments, in which Jimmy searches through a filthy, horrid dumpster for shredded paper that he eventually learns was being housed in a nice clean recycling bin 10 feet away from him. We get a brief, rare glimpse at professional unity between the brothers McGill, evidently having been a lifelong dream of Jimmy's, while a seed is planted, which is effectively paid off in the subsequent episode, in regards to quote-unquote Howard's refusal to work alongside Jimmy at HHM. 60. We get the return of the legendary Slippin' Jimmy, and we're witness to the execution of Nacho's medication switcheroo plot against Hector. The scene is viscerally intense, thanks in large part due to a combination of the direction, editing, and pinpoint cinematography. 59. This episode really puts into motion Nacho's plot to take out Hector, which is awesome and tense. It's great to see the return of an on-screen dynamic that has always been great, humorous fun. The immensely contrasting duo consisting of Ignacio Varga and Daniel Wormold, while Jimmy's clever community service hustle is an absolute blast. 58. We truly get the most effective car crash sequence I've ever witnessed, thanks in large part due to the stellar editing and sound design, and this vehicular accident is perfectly and naturally set up in this episode, and prior to it in the form of the similarly edited piece in which Kim jarringly awakens from a car nap, as well as her ever-increasing, evidently overwhelming workload. We're also given a scene between Nacho and his sweet, honorable father, Manuel, their meetings always being emotional, powerful, and Chuck, sadly, though creatively effectively, officially gains a new adversary in the form of longtime business partner and friend Howard Hamlin. 57. Inflatable provides us with an exceedingly fun montage, focusing on Jimmy's devious but humorously entertaining plot to get himself fired from Davis and Maine. It's got this distinct visual style and introduces us to what would become Saul Goodman's vast classic collection of colorful and inherently rebellious dress shirts. 56. I'm always grinning when the kooky Kettlemans are involved. Jimmy and Mike's collective takedown of them is so fun and unsurprisingly creative. Said clever scheme involves a Tonka truck, a blacklight, as well as Mike's notorious patience and expert observational skills. 55. Mike's coconut shoe stunt is so goddamn cool and creative. It's also preceded by a return from Gus's doctor, to whom we were introduced back in Breaking Bad. The execution of transferring the coke remnants from the hanging shoes to Hector's truck is simply genius, as before Mike snipes the sneakers, while the drivers are stopped, he sporadically shoots into the air to familiarize them with the sound of pretty constant gunfire, so as not to get suspicious when Mike ultimately shoots the coke-filled shoes as they're dangling over the truck. It is such a brilliantly conceived plot. We then get a fun and momentous, in regards to the score, sequence in which this lightly powdered truck and its drivers are stopped, searched, and seized once they reach the border. 54. I dig the practical and slow-burning Mike storyline as he tries to discover who is behind prohibiting him from sniping Hector Salamanca via some visually wicked time lapses. We also get a rare moment of levity and reminiscing between the McGill boys before we're reminded by a stern Charles that the Chuck v. Jimmy storyline has officially commenced, and he will not rest until Jimmy has paid for what he did to him in regards to the numbers switcheroo plot. 53. This episode features the most in-depth look thus far at what we unmistakably learn here is a mental, not physical issue. Chuck's doctor states very matter-of-factly, after displaying for Jimmy, that Charles' disease is a manifestation of something deeper. And this very clear and early revelation adds such a tremendous amount of dimension to Chuck. Fun fact about this episode's title. Looking at the first season's titles, you might notice a theme. Uno, Mijo, Nacho, etc. 105 is evidently the outlier here. Well, the story is that the initial plan was to title this episode Jell-O, but the Saul team wasn't able to clear this with Jell-O, the actual trademarked brand. So instead the episode was titled Alpine Shepherd Boy. 52. Ray Seahorn does a beautiful job in her directorial debut. Hit and Run is a solid piece within the puzzle that is part 1 of season 6. We also get this really cool encounter that I never expected occurring between Kim and Mike. Hit and Run even provides us with an appearance from Breaking Bad alum Wendy, the root beer guzzling prostitute. 51. I absolutely adore the scene in which Ignacio parkours his way in and out of a building to retrieve dope before the authorities get to their stash. A highlight of the scene being Lalo in his vehicle watching Nacho like an action movie as he munches nuts. Perhaps, wee bit hard to tell, but he snacks on them like he's eating popcorn at the cinema. We're also witness to the origin of Breaking Bad alum Domingo's nickname, Crazy 8. 50. Black and Blue depicts the planting of a couple very intriguing seeds in the form of P.I. Janadowski's introduction, as well as Gus, ironically, planting a weapon deep within his underground lair and future lab. After being absent for a few episodes, Lalo returns in extremely cool and interesting and typically imposing fashion. I truly never expected meeting Margaret Ziegler, widow of the late Werner, let alone Lalo meeting her. Every moment in which these two are even in the same proximity is filled with this uncomfortable, foreboding tension. 49. We get the best of the black and white season openers as we're fully introduced to Jeff, the prying cab driver, and we get the BCS debut of the late Breaking Bad alum Robert Forster, who portrays the exceedingly intriguing and mysterious Ed the Vacuum Repairman, while Lalo's continued quest to ultimately take down Gustavo is perpetually riveting. 48. The odd and exceedingly complicated relationship between Jimmy and Howard continues to intrigue, while we get a welcomed second consecutive Better Call Saul appearance from the classic duo consisting of the great Hank Schrader and Steve Gomez. 47. This episode features a number of notable character introductions, as we get our first BCS appearance from the ever-intriguing Lydia Rodart Quayle, our first official appearance of Saul Goodman, fittingly via TV commercial, as well as the BCS debut of the now infamous Laundry. We also get the quiet commencement of the Nacho Hector medication plotline, only after a tense meeting between Hector and Manuel Varga. 46. We're provided with a welcomed consecutive appearance from the humorously moronic Price. His new Hummer, with this sort of Ronald McDonald aesthetic, is so ridiculous and hilariously lame, perfectly fitting for his delightfully dweeby character. We also get a scam starring Victor and Giselle Sinclair, and featuring Breaking Bad alum Ken the Douchebag. 45. The Squat Cobbler concoction by Jimmy for Mr. Naivete himself, Daniel Wormold, is one of Mr. McGill's most outrageous cons. Everything in regards to this Price's stolen baseball card-centric storyline is a f***ing blast, featuring multiple humorously contrasting character combinations. 44. It's great fun watching Jimmy's ultimately successful investigation into the Kettlemans with Mike's assistance, while Ignacio establishes himself early on here as an interesting and imposing presence. 43. This episode presents to us a quietly tense black and white opening, while the ending commences this effective side story of guilt and vulnerability in regards to Howard, and deeply, bizarrely, and tragically repressed grief and resentment in regards to Jimmy. There are just so many complex and subtly and intriguingly conveyed emotions brewing as a result of Chuck's death. 42. This episode is great fun, featuring a pair of wicked and impressive Slippin' Jimmy cons, the first of which opens the episode and features not only Marco, but also the series' first Saul Goodman reference/instance, the second being Jimmy's heroic billboard stunt, during which what would become Jimmy's trusted college production crew is introduced. 41. We get this kind of cheeky introduction to the legendary Gus Fring, as well as Saul's eventual receptionist Francesca. It's an artistically effective and kind of sad but completely sensible decision to introduce Francesca as this sweet, bubbly woman, given that we know she ultimately just fucking oozes misery. Chuck's whole witness-related plot designed to fuck Jimmy is really well constructed. I like that this plotline bookends this episode, and it provides us with a really wonderful, rageful performance from Mr. Odenkirk. 40. All of the material involving Saul and Barry Corbin's Mr. Acker creatively conning Mesa Verde is humorously entertaining. The final scene, in which Gus recruits Mike as a soldier on the basis of revenge, is exceptional. Esposito is excellent here, and the score is simultaneously subtle and goosebump-inducing. In fact, the same musical theme plays beneath the Season 3 scene, in which Gus meets Mike at his place of work, before revealing his deep disdain toward Hector and discussing with Mike potential future employment. 39. For a couple seconds, we believe we're viewing a classic black and white season opener, as we view discolored ties fall in slow motion. Then colored ones start to fall. A quick, clever subversion of expectations before giving us this grand mansion tour, which concludes with a wonderfully intriguing final shot. A notable highlight of Wine and Roses is the scene containing the hilarious encounter between Jimmy and Kevin Wachtel at the country club, in which Jimmy obviously falsely claims Kevin and everyone around him to be anti-Semites. 38. There's always tension and sheer entertainment when Mike is behind a sniper, and this instance is no exception. The opening scene featuring Jimmy and Chuck and their dying mother is so fucking brilliant. Extremely simple, but internally ultra complex. I always find these scenes in which we get a piece of the puzzle in regards to Chuck's deep-seated disdain and resentment toward Jimmy to be genius and small. It's so realistically complicated that instead of there being one single event that ripped these two brothers apart, we slowly learn of the multitude of diverse layers behind this fractured and pretty heartbreaking relationship. And the one-shot scene in which Chuck is agonizing in a hospital bed whilst being poked and prodded is simply masterful filmmaking. The upside-down framing forces the viewer to become disoriented and viscerally uncomfortable, while the stillness of the shot makes us feel as helpless as Chuck. 37. We get the much-anticipated continuation of the Gene Takovic storyline, which we hadn't experienced since the Season 5 premiere, which gives us a wonderful introduction to the legendary Carol Burnett's Marion. The Great Cinnabon heist and the preparation for it is so creative and meticulous and enthralling. I really appreciate the balls on Peter Gould and company to present an entire episode right near series end in black and white. 36. Ray Seahorn is stupendous in the scene in which Kim tells off a Howard Hamlin that may not necessarily deserve it. The final scene in which Gus and his men brutally murder Arturo before Gus imposingly and sadistically claims Nacho as his property is utterly phenomenal. Esposito is particularly chilling here. 35. The opening scene is wild, ultimately visceral, kind of painful to watch. We get an appearance from the mysterious and unbelievably deeply connected vet, Dr. Caldera, which is always fantastic. The final scene, in which Jimmy rambles through Chuck's letter with his mouth full as Kim wells up as a result of his sort of numb reaction, is so subtly brilliant and emotionally complex. 34. The opening scene, featuring Mike's utilization of his recently concocted hose of nails, is simply badass, while the scene in which Kim defends Jimmy to Chuck, while knowing Jimmy to be in the wrong, is sensational, primarily due to a particularly fantastic performance from Ray Seahorn. The episode's final moments, featuring Chuck's print shop head injury, are so shocking and cringe-inducing and uncomfortable, deliberately so. The jittery, erratic editing, cinematography, lighting, and perfect sound design really collectively enhance this moment's seismic effectiveness. 33. I absolutely adore the street life montage. Gus and Mike's engineer audition call is kind of, for me personally, inexplicably excellent and interesting. I suppose I find it to be entertainingly and satisfyingly practical and detailed, meticulous. We also get our first official peek into the Breaking Bad timeline, which is instantly and inherently captivating. 32. Jonathan Banks is subtly amazing here. I really dig all of the support group-centric material. It's refreshing to see Mike develop a sweet, verging on flirtatious relationship with Anita, even though it's short-lived. And it's super satisfying seeing Mr. Ehrmantraut call out the support group swindler. I thoroughly enjoy the rather badass and brutal scene in which an injured Nacho assists the psychotic Marco and Lionel as the twins carry out an absolute massacre. 31. The dynamic between Jimmy, Nacho, and Lalo is simply captivating, while the return of Hank and Gomi is incredibly thrilling for any superfan of Breaking Bad. We also get an incredibly badass Mike moment as he absolutely f***s up a hooligan who, along with his homies, was attempting to rob Mike before our boy literally steps onto and over the now broken-armed bitch. 30. We get a super telling, subtly revelatory intro in regards to Chuck's quiet jealousy toward Jimmy's humor, charisma, his people skills. We also get a monumental meeting at episode's end between Mike and Hector Salamanca in his Better Call Saul debut. Banks and Margolis are particularly brilliant when opposite one another. 29. It's amazing seeing the Cousins' BCS debut as they're accompanied by their eerie musical theme, while Bali High's final scene at Hector's shop is truly one of my favorites in the series. It's so cool seeing all of these huge, genuinely fucking tough personalities cooped up in one small environment. Banks and Margolis are a pair of powerhouses, delivering spectacular, fucking intense, and exceedingly captivating performances. 28. Uno is a sensational introduction to the series. We're impressively, organically introduced to a multitude of BCS elements, characters, and dynamics. With a simple Lord Vader reference, we're instantaneously informed of Jimmy's feelings toward Howard. The image of Jimmy and HHM employee Kim Wexler nonchalantly sharing a cigarette in silence informs us of Jimmy's close relationship and history with Kim. We learn of Slippin' Jimmy's con man past and dip our toe into Chuck's exceedingly complex illness. We're ushered out of this premiere with a wonderful Breaking Bad connection, which, if you're unfamiliar with Saul's parent series, simply feels like a dangerous and intriguing pilot cliffhanger. 27. Music is a very prevalent part of this episode in the brilliant and beautiful opening montage during the gradual progression of Jimmy and Kim's prospective occupations and the regression of their relationship, their communication. Then we get the fabulous scene in which Gus's German workers are shipped off to the laundry before entering this impressive underground environment to the tune of Big Rock Candy Mountain. And soulful music is the reasoning for the audible distraction that leads to Huel's ultimate arrest. 26. It goes without saying that it's wonderful to see our iconic Walt-Jesse duo back together. It's also wicked to see an alternate view of Saul's Breaking Bad intro. It's even kind of goosebump-inducing to hear Pinkman speak Lalo's name, which subtly ties these two series together. And the ending of this awesome scene features the greatest scene transition in either of these shows. The crystal ship drives away from the grave Saul thought he might be buried in as we push into said grave. Then within this ditch appears a black and white Gene as we then transition to the future. It's visually stirring and quietly eerie, and Victor's bar break-in scam, guest starring Devin Rattray and Kevin Sussman, is a blast. 25. Marco includes one of my favorite montages in the Gilliverse. It's stunningly edited and perfectly scored. This Jimmy Marco two-man show is a largely singular blast. It's super fun, contains heart and Marco's passing, and the ring Jimmy acquires as a result of it. greatly informs our titular character going forward. 24. Axe and Grind is packed with multiple excellent moments. The tension and ultimately action-filled confrontation between Lalo and Casper. The beautiful scene in which a glassy-eyed Mike speaks to his granddaughter via telephone as he, unbeknownst to Kaylee, watches as she gazes at the night sky with wonder and curiosity. The very intriguing shoplifting-centric glimpse into Kim's past, featuring her evidently unfortunately, at least somewhat, influential sorry excuse for a mother, and we're provided with the vet's final appearance as he shows off to Jimmy and Kim his black book, inside of which resides a very familiar vacuum repair-centric business card. 23. The scene at Eladio's poolside is expectedly brilliant, featuring another wonderfully charismatic performance from Stephen Bauer. The scene at Howard's sort of wake is brilliant and awkward and tragic. Jimmy and Kim's breakup is inevitable, but heartbreaking nonetheless, and the hard cut to a later-in-life Saul Goodman is wonderfully jarring. 22. Ray Cruz's Tuco has always been a favorite Breaking Bad character of mine, so it was a joy to see him play such a prominent role in this episode. It's also great to see the return of old characters like Gonzo and No-Dos. It's entertaining and impressive to view Jimmy use his verbal and law-centric prowess to get individuals, eventually referred to by Nacho as the Skate Rat twins, out of a seemingly inescapable situation. 21. Stephen Bauer graces our screen in Something Unforgivable, which is always a treat. The contrast between Lalo's exuberance and flamboyance and Nacho's intense, reserved nature is fantastic. The scene at Fireside between the two is particularly heart-pumping, as is the fantastic and clever Lalo-centric action sequence, while the Jimmy Kim storyline is interesting in regard to character and character development. The episode concludes with this foreboding feeling as what has been the typical Jimmy Kim roles have now been reversed, as a tentative, clearly concerned Jimmy stares in a now unpredictable Kim's direction, evidently unsure of the lengths Kim is willing to go in regard to legality or lack thereof. 20. It's always great to see the scene-stealing Ray Cruz in this role. The dynamic between Tuco and Nacho is bloody fantastic. It's as if Nacho is a largely composed dog owner trying to keep his unstable ticking time bomb of a pit bull at bay. Tuco's ultimate encounter with Mike is brutal but entertaining, as well as kind of fun and humorous, in regard to Mike playing the part of this oblivious grandpa in order to bait Tuco. 19. This episode goes full Breaking Bad, if you will. We get a classic cartel scene at Eladio's poolside, and the episode in general quite heavily deals in Gus versus Hector matters, which is always top-tier TV. 18. The musical opening, consisting of a lovely instrumental version of Something Stupid, is a beautiful follow-up to the 407 opening montage, though it delivers the opposite message/tone. The 407 opening depicted a gradual drifting apart in regard to the romantic relationship between Jimmy and Kim, although throughout much of it the two are physically together, whilst in the 509 opening, the pair are geographically very distant from one another, though the love between them, toxic or not, is stronger than ever. The final scene is one of Kim's greatest moments, as she bravely stands up to Lalo, completely unaware of the fact that she is under the protection of Mike's sniper. 17. Carrot and Stick brings us the personally uplifting, long-anticipated return of the hilarious and ridiculous Kettlemans. Kim's verbal takedown of Betsy in particular is brilliant and rather intimidating. Foreboding is the word I'd use to sum up my feelings during the episode's final Kim and Jimmy moments. They depart the Kettlemans' establishment before a vehicle begins to slowly follow behind them. All of the Nacho material is exceedingly intense. It's viscerally nerve-wracking, the moments leading up to Nacho knocking out his initially hidden observer. Nacho's standoff against Marco and Lionel is thrilling and badass, as is Mike standing up to Gus and the gun-wielding Tyrus, only after locking himself in a room with the two of them when Gus threatens the safety of Ignacio's father. 16. We get a perfectly fittingly fun and trepidation-inducing introduction to the great Lalo Salamanca. Everything regarding the defense of Mr. Babineau is both creative and hilarious, namely the scene in which Jimmy, playing the role of a New Orleans pastor, and his college crew take calls from Suzanne Erickson, as Suzanne looks at phonied-up online pictures of a seemingly heroic and holy volunteer in Huel. 15. Saul Goodman delivers one of his most magnificent, magnetic performances here. After some wonderfully and humorously depicted preparation leading up to said performance, he entertainingly and condescendingly owns a room packed with heavies within their respective fields, who are left stunned and speechless before Mr. Goodman savagely and gleefully whistles as he exits this suddenly silent boardroom. Peak television. We then end with a twist of a cliffhanger as we're expecting a heart-wrenching breakup between Jimmy and Kim, but instead we get a proposal from Miss Wexler. 14. We get the interesting origins of the classic Breaking Bad bell, of course belonging to Hector, while Odenkirk and Seahorn are wonderful and genuine in their high stakes in regard to their relationship scenes. I've always been drawn to what was the very wholesome friendship between Mike and Mr. Ziegler. Of course, the awesome Werner's escape-centric cliffhanger throws a wrench into the works in that department. 13. The slick and versatile direction really stands out here. Figures Mr. Vince Gilligan is seated in the director's chair. Gus's final showdown against Lalo is badass, as are his bold words directed toward Eladio, to whom Lalo plans on gifting this camera and the tape within it. All of this adding even more effectiveness to Gustavo's eventual triumph over the Don and so many of the Salamancas in Breaking Bad. The final burial scene is eerily beautiful and impeccably scored, as Jonathan Banks delivers this beautifully subtle and melancholy facial performance. 12. Gus's ominous and engrossing monologue at an unconscious Hector's bedside is utterly brilliant. It perfectly encapsulates Gus's deep disdain toward Hector. The final piñata scene is fucking badass. It's so satisfying watching Saul, Huel, and the Mountain Man from episode 109 force these thieving hooligans to absolutely piss their pants in fear in exceptionally creative and colorful fashion. 11. Waterworks is exceptionally written and directed by Breaking Bad creator Vince Gilligan. Ray Seahorn brings her perpetually awesome performance to new heights here. No matter how stony-faced she may initially appear on the surface, her eyes just swim with complex emotion. The scene between Kim and Cheryl, as Cheryl reads the truth of what happened to Howard, is masterfully executed. The lack of sound, the sporadic inserts of key points of Howard's transcribed tragic story as Cheryl learns it. The continuation of Jean's scam is fun and tense, and Marion discovering Jean's true identity is just artistic perfection, in part due to the ironic fact that she cracked the code on the laptop that was purchased for her with money made from the scam that Jean concocted. We also get this brilliant kind of mirroring moment. In the first scene of the series, we get a glimpse of a black and white Jean watching old Better Call Saul commercials, the television's reflection in its glasses appearing in color, while in Waterworks, when Jean catches Marion viewing an old Saul commercial, the only aspect of the screen that appears in color is, again, the reflection of the commercial in Jean's glasses. Why is the commercial the only colored aspect of Mr. Takovic's otherwise colorless world? I mean, there's certainly this element that Saul Goodman led a literally colorful, fast, wild, wealthy life, whereas Jean Takovic is this depressed, paranoid man, initially reluctant to take chances anymore, missing the glory days. He's a shell of his former self, so the lack of color is perfectly fitting. The technical reason for the saturated glasses reflection is the fact that each of the three primary personas within three distinct parts of our titular character's life is presented through a different colored filter. The past of Slip and Jimmy McGill is presented through this sort of blue tint. The present of Jimmy McGill, before he ultimately becomes Saul Goodman, is presented in Technicolor, whereas the post-Breaking Bad timeline starring Jean Takovic is presented in black and white. 10. Saul Gone really is an excellent series finale. In fact, this episode, alongside multiple components of Season 6 Part 2 in general, is a satisfying send-off to both BCS and its parent series. It's beautifully written and constructed, delving deeply and captivatingly into the theme of regret. A number of returning players from both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are organically woven into the story. Walt, Marie, Bill Oakley, Suzanne Erickson, and of course the great Charles McGill. I love this ending for our titular character, which I was definitely not anticipating. Saul Goodman's greatest trick that he's pulled on me in particular was him, Jimmy, being genuinely repentant and honest. This atonement coming as a surprise in large part due to the fact that it is, in this instance, gravely to Jimmy's detriment, which is what assures that you know for a fact that Mr. McGill is truly repentant, whether or not you believe redemption is possible for this character. 9. Bagman is a sensational two-man show starring Jimmy and Mike. The first sniper-centric scene, one of Mr. Armentrout's most badass moment in either of these shows, is enthralling and chaotic. The cinematography is slick as can be, and the sound design is so cool and visceral. The second sniper-centric scene is cinematic and extremely intense. The cinematography is brilliantly immersive and stunning, as are an abundance of shots within this episode. All of the conversations had in the desert, as our duo do their utmost to survive, are at times humorous, at times quite powerful. Bob Odenkirk cracks me up in a number of instances here, including the moment in which an utterly defeated Jimmy refuses to drink his own urine because he doesn't want someone stumbling across a corpse with a mouthful of piss, while Mike's monologue about living solely for his remaining family is poignant and perfectly performed by the brilliant Banks. 8. JMM is packed with wonderful moments. We get the brilliant shot of the Pollos Hermanos bursting into flames over a stoic Gus Fring's shoulder. We also get the sensational scene in which the out-of-line, deluded Jimmy flips the fuck out and verbally rips Howard apart. Odenkirk is particularly excellent here. We also get the fabulous scene in which Kim displays her immense skill as a lawyer. As one moment, she and Saul's names are being quietly reamed by Kevin Wachtel. The next, Kim is calmly and completely turning the tables on Kevin, smugly laying out to him that what he just stated to be Kim's faults were actually his own. It is one of Miss Wexler's finest moments. We even get a small, ambiguous but intriguing taste of Gus's mysterious past alongside Peter Schuler. I also love this episode's title and its utilization in not only this particular piece, but just the series in general. Let's briefly, no pun intended, talk briefcase origins. Kim purchases it for Jimmy around the time he was reinstated as a lawyer, though as Miss Wexler states, she initially wasn't aware that she was purchasing a briefcase for Jimmy's new and official identity, Saul Goodman, so she had Jimmy McGill's initials printed on the case. Jimmy kind of sarcastically says that the JMM can instead represent his new motto, Justice Matters Most, which is quite ironic. Then, in this particular episode, this motto is brought up when Jimmy is sat opposite Lalo, at which point Eduardo tells Jimmy that he needs a new motto, just make money, which for the vast majority of Jimmy's life is his true motto. 7. Episode 310 is an exceptionally strong season finale. The lantern imagery here is truly tragic. It shows up in the finale's beginnings and its end. In the opening scene, we move toward and are engulfed by the light of the lantern, while a young Chuck reads Jimmy the same book that Jimmy referenced to Chuck in the season 3 premiere. Then we see the light of the lantern nearing episode's end, right before it's knocked off a table by Chuck, as he and his home are shortly consumed by flames. This lantern represents Chuck's condition, his childhood with Jimmy, his resentment toward his brother. It represents Chuck himself, who goes up in the flames of a fire he started. The scene in which Chuck is finally pushed out of HHM by Howard and is forced to depart the establishment in front of hundreds of individuals, obliviously applauding him, is spectacular and overflowing with subtext. Lantern also includes one of my favorite scenes of the series, the one in which Chuck breaks Jimmy emotionally, pushing him a step closer to becoming Saul Goodman. The performances here are small and powerful. Chuck's cruel words, which are definitely untrue, provide a complete and utter gut punch. It's genuinely tragic seeing the sad, toxic, nasty state of this brotherhood. It's even sadder to think that this interaction is the final time these brothers speak to one another before Chuck's death. We also finally witness the moment in which Hector has the stroke that puts him in the wheelchair we had seen in Breaking Bad, only after he's had this ultra-entertaining meltdown, typically terrifically performed by the late great Mark Margolis. 6. Chicanery is, simply put, a masterful hour of television. It sadly perfectly encapsulates the exceedingly complicated and damaged relationship between Jimmy and Chuck. Michael McKean's final monologue is fucking elite, practically all of it being captured in a single shot, as is Jimmy's spectacularly executed plot, which ultimately propels said monologue into motion. Said plot provides us with a perfectly fitting pickpocket-related introduction to Breaking Bad alum Huel Babineau. 5. This episode presents this practically perfectly structured and paced, largely singular story, the final moments of which feature some of the finest acting and writing I've seen on television. I'm referring to the I broke my boy scene, in which Mike tells Stacy the truth about his son Maddie's death, and his involvement in the lead up to it. Banks is simply Emmy-worthy in this entirely Mike-centric episode. In fact, I believe this particular performance of his to be his greatest hour ever, portraying the particularly clever and badass Mr. Ehrmantraut. 4. Pimento is an exceedingly important episode. It is the one which contains the game-changing reveal that it hasn't been Howard blocking Jimmy from joining the firm as a lawyer for all these years. It was always the immeasurably vindictive Chuck, and the scene in which Chuck finally speaks the truth on this matter is really powerfully and genuinely performed by McKean and Odenkirk. It's also impeccably written and paced. We also get our introduction to the hilarious dynamic between Mike and the humorously naive Daniel Price Wormold, as well as an immensely entertaining encounter between Mike and Stephen Ogg Sobchak. 3. Rock and Hard Place is an incredibly powerful and emotional roller coaster. Michael Mando is simply sensational in Ignacio's swan song. Vargas' final conversation with his father Manuel is heartbreaking, while Nacho's final monologue is utterly glorious as he goes out on a shocking and heart-wrenching, though heroic, note. 2. Plan and Execution is this masterful amalgamation of the first part of the final season, as Jimmy and Kim's plan to burn Howard to the ground fully and brilliantly reveals itself. In fact, it makes you appreciate the 6 prior episodes of the season even more, as you come to realize how exceptional the very gradual construction of this devious plot has truly been. Patrick Fabian gives this sympathetically unhinged, Emmy-worthy performance in this momentous and mega-effective episode, the final scene of which is one of the most utterly shocking and tragic I've ever watched. It depicts the true collision between the lawyer aspect of the show and the criminal cartel aspect of the show. 1. Winner is a practically perfect episode of television. The opening karaoke scene is not only a humorous, smile-inducing blast to watch, it is also extremely poignant. The classic ABBA tune, The Winner Takes It All, sadly, wonderfully encapsulates the complex and immensely troubled, to say the least, relationship between Jimmy and Chuck. The rat race between Mike and Lalo, it's sensational watching these two sharp, persistent, and patient men try to outsmart one another whilst on the hunt for Mr. Ziegler. Werner's tragically inevitable death and the lead up to it, in the form of him being forced to say his last ever words to his wife, is incredibly emotionally effective and ultimately truly visually dazzling. The final sequence is phenomenal. Jimmy seems to finally be sincere during his hearing as he quote-unquote emotionally references his late brother and the letter he received from him. Not only does Jimmy fool the court with this act of his, he fools Kim, who has been tearing up during his big speech. It is foreboding and brilliant as the camera pulls away from a stunned Kim after an invigorated Jimmy has told her that he's going to practice law under a different name. We get the final words of the season as Jimmy struts down the hall away from Kim. It's all good, man.